So last time,
5 weeks ago.
shut up. So last time when I was younger and yet somehow more mature,
I had a necklace that went down much lower.
yes, than the current one that my mother gave me because I kept breaking the other ones.
Ever thought about like, not breaking your necklaces?
You know, the thought occurred to me, but where's the fun in that?
Okay.
Last time, and a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away,
You're saying you just saw Star Wars Bowl.
honestly, that maybe subconsciously, but it was just the joke that popped into mind. I wasn't thinking about it. Last time, we talked about death, and this time we're going to be talking about the final death, whatever that exactly means. I mean, talking about hell. Now, you've done a lot of reading recently on this in preparation for a class.
I'm still working through it, yeah.
But our CTD Ecclesia crowd is not necessarily 100% overlap for our CTD
Graphai and regular.
Cloud?
Cloud. Yeah, so I guess if you're...
You know what? That still works, though, Cloud.
If you're coming in for the first time and this is your introduction to Call to Defend, we have here's your...
I deeply apologize.
This is Ecclesia. Ecclesia's focus is church-related things.
Yeah.
And that we mean like church history, events happening in the church, reflecting on how the church be thinking about certain things. So you definitely get into theology stuff as well. And that's definitely a key aspect of it. And so this was kind of like a mixture of your and my ideas where we would kind of just talk about really important things that the church teaches and like how do we go about thinking about these things, hence the past 2 episodes. But then we have Graphai, which is our Bible study basically, and theology, and Apologia, which is
Apologetics and polemics.
Yep, and then a regular, which is definitely more the apologetic, and because Apologia, regardless of the name, is more polemic than it is apologetic.
True. Yeah. CTD regular, the main, kind of dabbles in a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
but
then these were born because it gave them an actual spot, because otherwise regular one was getting a little swallowed up just with everything.
I'm disappearing into the divot of my couch.
Anyways, all to say, yes, so we do a Friday night class that we then record and we share them on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
Wednesday morning, afternoon on Cult of Fun Regular and Graphai. We're rerunning Chaos Monster series on Graphai right now.
Nice.
And those are doing better, actually.
Good.
And our other podcast is over there, and I have some other stuff that's being cooked up for next month. But then regular is where we post it as well, because sometimes we get into more apologetics based on those things we're teaching. Like Divine Counsel is a theology, but it plays into the apologetics of certain verses that people try to argue over. It's like, if you understand theology, you'll be able to do apologetics for your text.
Yeah, man.
So what Caleb was referring to is that the group asked me to present the 3 main views of hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I say main, of which I start off with one camp, and I'm just now in a spot where like I just don't have any solid feelings about anyone.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the point, is to work through that here.
Yeah. And so I've been working through and reading through some of these things. I'm still wrapping my head around a lot of them, because some of them are the hard thing when you get into the discussion of hell. Because here's the thing: if you're talking about hell, sometimes you ask if you're talking about the mode of hell, like the way it works, or if we're talking about what hell is, or if we're talking about like the existence of it. And so I'll just put it this way: in my research, the 3 main camps, for the most part, all agree that hell exists.
Mm-hmm.
And they agree to a degree on like what happens in there. The question that comes after that is the mode, in terms of like the length of time, the severity of it, et cetera, or like what's the final outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That's the spot where it's like, okay, we're a little still trying to wrap my head around some of those things, because there's arguments I've never heard before, and they're compelling.
Yeah.
From what I can understand, and there's passages that are compelling for those arguments too, in different sides.
Well, yeah. I mean, if there weren't passages that were compelling, people wouldn't believe them.
No, yeah, and then all 3
generally,
and all 3 major like umbrella views, because historically there's a lot of sub views within them, and we keep saying, oh, it's a traditional view. Like, some of those came up later. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying to what degree are we calling it traditional? We call it traditional because under this umbrella, or traditional because of this specific explanation of it? And that's where you kind of get to like, okay, so what qualifies as traditional?
Yeah. Well, because we grew up Protestant, like mainline Protestant church. don't want to speak for you, but I'd say we probably grew up mostly ECT, right?
Yeah.
Eternal conscious torment.
Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking, I was like, what do I want to say after that? I was like, I really don't want to say anything after that. So
yeah. So I grew up with the eternal conscious torment, and that's the position I started at. I still feel confident that I can defend it and present it. I definitely think that you can argue for it. But there's just some passages that I'm still wrapping my head around, like, I'm not sure what you do with that one personally. And the same with the other views. And that's when we had a group last night, and they were asking my thoughts, just pre-thoughts or before I kind of share them. I'm going to provide you the overarching view, and if you want to get into the subgroups inside, you can. But I'm just going to tell you the overarching picture of each one, because that's already going to be a lot to kind of process, especially if you grew up with only one view.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, to be honest, I definitely believe that you can get a foundation within Scripture. Of course, I believe that. But then I also was like, there is a point, though, where we are purely going philosophical, and we're reading that into the text, and we're just speculating at this point. So, like, I think you can derive, to be charitable, either one of the three umbrella groups. Now, how it exactly works, like, for instance, if you take ECT, how does ECT work? There's a point where that just becomes more speculative, hence why there's so many variations.
And it always will be.
Same thing with annihilation or conditionalism, is like, to what point are they officially annihilated? There's speculation on that.
Yeah.
To the as I call it, because I think it's more, because some people call it universalism, and it's different than what we expect today as universalism.
Yeah.
Today we expect universalism is like there is no hell, everyone's just going to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional universalism, because all three views go back to the very early church.
Yeah. Origen taught traditional universalism.
Gregory of Nyssa taught that too. He had a very, very philosophical view on it. You have several.
Gregory of Nyssa, very philosophical.
Oh, and I know.
Never. No way.
It is interesting. There are interesting arguments that definitely leave you like, it's interesting. Then again, when you come back to it, like, okay, so not discounting their opinions, but when you get down to the text, can we derive that? No. Does it deny it? Some of them you're like, no, not really. So at one point, is it just like purely just our trying to figure it out, and we don't really have a conclusion on it? But anyways, so the more traditional, I say traditional, and like oldest view of universalism is that it's almost like it's not a great one-to-one, but it's almost like a variation of purgatory. Purgatory, from my understanding, because I've been trying to understand this too, because this kind of falls into the camp of discussion at times. I'm not going to be presenting it though, because it's not really a doctrine of hell.
No, it's not.
But it gets roped in sometimes. But purgatory kind of deals with, we believers, if I understand correctly, go through a process of cleansing fire and come out.
Yeah, it's kind of further sanctification.
Right. And so for like Nyssa and Origen and a variety of others, there's a good number of them that do hold this view. Their view is that evil is burned away in hell, and that you are restored into new creation. And that it is painful. It is a process. There's a layer of punishment, because for them, and there's biblical precedent for this, punishment tends to be corrective.
Yeah.
And so they're seeing like, well, if punishment's corrective, it's still punishment, it's still painful, but there's a corrective outcome to it. Then you have the conditionalist who's like, the punishment is final. There is no returning from that punishment. And then with all the parables and different variation and analogies, and then like the Old Testament, where they're talking about the fire consuming and the burning away, and the thing that's called eternal usually is a fire that's called eternal, which means, and if it's tied to God, well, then it's God's justice eternal, not necessarily the being are eternal. And then the ECT was like, well, look at Revelation, where it says that the devil's being tormented for eternity. But then the others will reply is like, right, but the other figures are also in there with them, also been talked about figuratively. So what point is that? Or were you supposed to take that literally and also figuratively? Like, and it's just this huge thing. It's like, it's just interesting. And then you have the Apostolic Fathers and the Didache, and there's dispute over where they actually sit. Because you can argue the Didache, for instance, is a conditionalist position based on the way it's phrased. Like, for instance, it says there's like two ways: the way of mortality and the way of right, but it's basically the way of life. Mortality implies you die. So then you get into the question of what does it mean to die? And it's a huge thing. And I, by no means, when I go to try and teach this next Friday, I'm going to be like, here's the positions. Be like, here's my best way I can like summarize these three views as I can.
It's interesting there you bring up death, right? And what exactly is death? Because that's kind of the question that set me on this road.
Yeah.
So I was sitting in the back room of where I work, watching cardboard be crushed.
That's the place to think about death.
It's funny you mentioned that because I actually commented to a coworker. I don't remember. I said something like, "How do you just know these things?" And I was like, contrary to popular belief, I am always thinking about something. I was like, 5 minutes ago, I was thinking about the doctrine of hell. Now I'm trying to think of a stupid dad joke. Right? And so I think actually that was the comment of like, I made a stupid dad joke. And like, how do you think of those? And I was like, I'm always thinking of something.
Yeah.
Which is not to pat my own self in the back. Usually my thoughts get me in trouble. But uh but I was thinking, sitting there watching the cardboard die in front of me. If death is destroyed in hell, then how can hell be death? Right? Because John says this is the second death,
Mm-hmm.
referring to hell. Right? Well, if death is destroyed, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah. And the hard thing too is with death being talked about is also one of the horsemen. It's one of the figures.
Mm-hmm.
So it's personified.
Right.
Paul does that too, where death is personified, but also sometimes death is attributed to being a power that the devil wields or uses. Maybe that's not the best term, but that's kind of like how it works. So there's time where it's treated like an actual person. There's times where it's treated like it's not. Sometimes it's treated like a weapon, and it's like it's the final enemy, and it's like all these things. Like, what do you? It is so outside of my cultural understanding of like how they're understanding this.
Perhaps it's somewhat along the line, and I'm going to go a little JW on you. It's along the line of spirit, right? Because sometimes spirit is just generally this like substance of something. But other times when we talk about the Holy Spirit, that's an actual person.
Yeah.
Right? So common words exist, right? Words that are used to mean two different things that are related, but not exactly the same. So, for example, when we talk about, and this is where the JWs get confused, when we talk about spirit as like this substance, right? This immaterial, not quite force, but or power, but like it has that within its essence. They take that and mistake that for the Holy Spirit just being God's power, substance, etc. And it's like, well, no, there's more to it than that. There's an actual acting through, right? This spirit, God's spirit, has personal agency distinct from just God the Father.
Yeah.
And you see that in the opening 2 verses of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps when we think about death, there's 2 different ways to think about it. What those are is kind of my question.
Well, I forgot to mention this too. The hard part too, because the thing I want to try and do is trying to look through different church fathers and history on it too, kind of the different perspectives on it, and then also look at Jewish sources. Here's the complication. Second Temple Judaism gives no real clear answer when they talk about it.
Yeah.
Some talk about as eternal conscious torment. Some talk about as a conditional. Some you can argue kind of goes the universal route. More than likely is going the conditional and the eternal conscious torment route. Old Testament, if you're trying to look at it for final punishment, as in like what hell is, you kind of end up more towards conditional stuff. But then also the question is, are you talking about Hades, which is different than hell? So how are you using those verses? If you go to New Testament, that's where you get to more explicit use of like what we understand as hell. And that's where you kind of have to work with, okay, are we talking about our Hades and Sheol again, or are we talking about Gehenna? Because you have Hades and death are thrown into the lake of fire. And they're death. They're the realm of the dead.
Yeah.
Which then gets into the question, what is death? But one quick thing historically, I would say that when it starts to become traditional as an umbrella for ECTs around the time of Augustine. Augustine also has a lot of sway and some positive things, but it's really around the time where it's like, this is officially like where the church is going to be standing on this. And that could be good it could be good or bad, depending on what you end up coming out with. Or
right, if it's accurate and true, then good.
Yeah. And if it's like,
it's not,
and you're like, okay, what do we do with that? And so that's kind of the difficult thing is that we have to understand that from the overarching umbrella, eternal conscious torment, which even then you have to understand, like, what does that really mean for eternal conscious torment? Because there's a resurrection still of some sort it seems, for them, where they're being judged. If I understand those texts correctly, it's like, all right, or is some will say their bodies are burned away and their spirit lives on. Some will say that their body lives, but they descend further into chaos and like into disruption. And if there's a bunch of other varieties from there, and there's some who say, well, they're just there, but they're being tormented forever, and there's not going to really answer what that torment looks like. And then you get to the other ones, like I said, where they're more like, no, your body is being purified with your spirit, and you're brought over, and then the conditionalist, you're just off and done. And probably the one of the clearest ones they'll try to point to is, do not fear the man that can kill the body, but fear the one who can destroy body and soul and hellfire.
Yeah. But what exactly does it mean to destroy, right? Destroy, we think in our modern context, destroy means to utterly and completely wipe out, no face of it, or nothing left on the face of the earth, no trace of its existence. That's not always how the Bible uses it.
Yeah.
Right? Because 1 Samuel 15 is a very famous passage for reasons.
Yeah.
Right? And God says, go and destroy the Amalekites. Well, you look a little bit later in the book, and the Amalekites are still there. The Israelites didn't disobey God. They went and they did what God had told them.
Yeah.
But the Amalekites were not utterly destroyed, not like we think of it today, because it's just not how they used the word back then.
The trickier part, I think, so there is that tricky part. The part that I think is the tricky part is you have to define, what does it mean to be human, what does it mean to be living, and what does it mean to die?
Yeah.
Because, so for instance, this is where I tend to disagree with a lot of the earlier church fathers. So like for the image of God, they argue image is a quality that is within us, such as rationality and reason. Like those things are what the image is.
Yeah.
But
the angels possess that too.
Right. And so then you have to say that they have that. And so and then it really comes down to like what they're trying to do is like really what a lot of Christians today are trying to do, because they're trying to avoid, they're trying to make sure they put as many barriers up between one position of Christianity and evolution.
Yes.
And it's like, you can do that. And I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but I just want, but sometimes there's extra barriers put up. So the question is, what does the text say? Well, the text first off calls humans icon in Greek, and Hebrew selim and demut. Well, those are religious terms of statues and idols. So right there, you're talking about the very fact that what it means to be human is to be a physical creature. Like, and that you're supposed, and they shouldn't be separated. That's the idea of humanity, that they're to be together.
Yeah.
Is that you are a physical thing, and that you have the breath of life in you. The question with the breath of life is, the animals also have the breath of life. So the breath of life is not what makes you human.
Right.
It's the very fact that you have a certain status that has made you human. But because you're human, you're also given these extra little things, such as dominion and relationship with the Lord, and all these things to play into it. Genesis 6 really gets into that as well, where when it tries to describe the cosmic imbalance, it even starts to kind of like attribute things to like the animals, like that they're facing this judgment too. Like there's just a cosmic disruption in what's happening in Genesis 6 with the causing for the flood. And so then you get, and so that's where I start to disagree with them, because the way they'll try to use image regarding Christ is they'll say that Christ is the image in regards to his pre-incarnate state. But if we use icon consistently, it would mean that Christ is the image because he's human, and that he's a divine person in human body form, revealing those things. So that's where I might disagree with them a little bit. And so but then part of that too is because with development of Greek philosophy at that time, I'm saying as a positive or negative thing, you're getting more into, some arguments are that what it means to be human is to be, as Socrates puts, is to be a soul or spirit. And so that is what you are.
Yeah.
And so when you get into that question, then it's kind of like, well, if the body dies, it means it ceases to like have life in it. But let's say what you are is your soul, then there's a sense where your person, for them in some sense, is still living, and therefore you can be suffering. Then you have to ask the question, okay, so hell is described as a place that's prepared for the demons and the devil. They're not material creatures like we are.
Right.
Maybe they have some kind of,
there's some sort of sense of corporeality to them.
Right.
Yes, but
so hell has to be something that impacts them and us. And that's where they're trying to get into the ideas like, okay, so maybe it is this, and they kind of label as eternal conscious torment for some of them, is because, well, we have the spirit element to us, and therefore that's what it means to be human. And it's like, you can argue that, but at the same time, the Bible also talks about how what it means to be human is to be this physical creature.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of when you die, some argue for soul sleep, some argue for there is an actual eternal afterlife where we're alive or conscious. And then there's some who say, well, maybe those who are in Christ are conscious and aware because they're technically living, and then those who are not are still in soul sleep.
Yeah.
And
well, and there's obviously a number of different passages you can go to there, right? I think the most hotly contested one would be 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5. Right? Because it's like those who are asleep in Christ. Okay, well, what does it mean to be asleep in Christ?
Yeah.
Is Paul merely talking about
the body being
what's asleep, and then that will be resurrected? Is he talking about soul sleep? Is it right? There's questions that are asked there that the Bible doesn't answer because it doesn't need to. But
and again, that's why I was saying, like, there's a point where in this, there's some people with like very much more confidence in me than I do, and I'm not saying I'm more humble than them or I have more figure. I was like, my struggles that I know that I have a lot of philosophical baggage and presuppositions that come with it, and it's hard sometimes to go through these texts and not try to read them with that lens. I'm not saying that means that lens is incorrect. It's just like I'm trying to make sure I understand it on its own terms. So, like, for instance, in the Old Testament, when we use soul, like we would use soul for, like, I guess, how would you define soul in general?
Ooh,
if you gave a brief definition.
That's a deeper question than,
like, not like a perfect one, but like if.
Sure, I guess if I'm going to borrow the language of the philosophers, then I would say soul is more so your person. Which is not to say it's my, person, it's my human being. Its person is, as I've said many times, action through agency, right? So perhaps person is the expression of what your soul is. I don't know. There's a couple different ways you could go with that.
Yeah.
But if I had to, I'd say the soul is the person, right? Because I would say I am, when we talk about soul, we talk about like who you are.
Yeah. So that's tricky because the Hebrew allows and doesn't allow that.
No, I know.
Because
that's why I'm hesitant.
You can use the nefesh, so it's nefesh, and you can use it to refer to yourself. Most literally refers to the throat because that is the passageway in which your ruach, or your breath of spirit, pass through. And so you are a living nefesh, you are a living soul, and that refers to the fact
living throat.
You're living. If I were to use like your living person is a living being. That's what it means to be human. Is that this is your soul in a sense, but also it's tied to who you are.
Right.
And the tricky thing is, and I think there's a reason we should do it because it helps us understand the metaphysics of reality and our thoughts and stuff. But the tricky thing is that we tend to separate spirit and body more than the Bible does.
Right.
Or in this case, if you want to go more trichotomist, spirit, soul, body. Whereas the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, they're like, this is just you. The entirety of this is you.
Well, but there is also somewhat of a difference there because let's consider 1 Samuel, right? When Samuel is called up, it's his spirit.
Right.
It says the spirit of Samuel.
It's the Elohim of him,
comes up. So did he have a physical body at that point? Maybe.
So that's where you get to other. So as you know, I've argued that Elohim refers to spiritual being.
If I may.
Yeah.
It is a medium calling him up.
Yeah.
Perhaps then it's the voice of Samuel, because if it's I don't know what the Hebrew word there is, but if it is nefesh, then
it's not my memory.
Okay, I was going to say I didn't know if it was the nefesh of Samuel. Then is it the throat of Samuel? So she's just speaking with Samuel's voice, and Saul recognizes that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. To my memory, I don't think it is nefesh, but I can check that.
I wouldn't think it would be, but like if that's the case, then that's something we'd have to consider.
Yeah. 1 Samuel 28, it looks like.
Yes, Witch of Endor.
And let's see.
I taught on that passage, and blew like the teens' minds away with it. So it's very much imprinted on my memory because it was nice. They were really, really into it. They were like very much wowed by it. It was cool.
So let's see.
Moral of the story: God's word is cool.
So Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall call upon you for this thing. The woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? Bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? Why are you are Saul? The king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? The woman said, I see Elohim coming up out of the earth. And he said to her, what is the appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. So there's something that is being seen.
So then is she seeing Samuel's spirit or body, or
That's where some that's
it's speculative, right? I mean,
well, then
we're
there's
doing
some
a lot
people
of
have argued that perhaps it's not really Samuel. It is like a spirit, like
yeah.
like
So I've heard demon. I've
demon
heard
pertaining to be Samuel. And
but I personally find that to be unconvincing
well, yeah,
because
I'm just throwing that out
no,
there
I
for our
know, but
audience.
I'm just tossing out um why I believe that's unconvincing. Because the spirit instructs Saul in accordance with God.
Yeah.
Right? Like he speaks on behalf of God and then says, because you've done this, you will be with me tomorrow.
Yeah.
That doesn't really, demons don't really speak on accordance of God.
Well, the other thing too is that Samuel's response is, "Why did you disturb me by bringing me up?"
Mm-hmm.
So there's that layer of like,
Was it soul sleep?
was it soul sleep? Because the Hebrew there is,
Or is he in heaven with God?
well, he's coming up from the
Well,
ground.
right, yeah, he's
So
coming from the ground. So, but
he's in the
is
underworld.
he in like some sort of, let's go Abraham's bosom here, right? Abraham's bosom is generally considered to be a pleasant place.
It's like if you go the dual perspective of
Right.
Sheol, that would be like the positive experience
Right,
versus like
yeah.
the other
So if
one's
he's in-
closer to Tartarus type of in
Exactly.
Greek mythology.
Yeah. So if he's in Abraham's bosom in the positive place, it would be disturbing to suddenly be called out of that into
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So that kind of gets into the, it's just all, like I said, like I feel like I can kind of go in different directions for each of them, because let's say we granted, let's say for the conditionalist perspective, let's say we granted the soul and body as being two different things. Like your person is still like your spirit, in some sense, as regards to your body, but your body's still part of you in the same time. I like how some scholars put is that you are in an incomplete state now when you're separated from your body. Like there's an incompletion there.
Mm.
And then when you're brought together back into a complete state of what you're supposed to be. And so let's say we went with the ECT could then argue, well, okay, so maybe they go back to an incomplete state for someone, depending on the age you're looking at, back to an incomplete state. And then that thing that's there, they're left in that turmoil, and then there's going to be tormented through that. But also, if it's an Elohim that they can see the body of. So it's like, in what sense is she seeing the spirit? We know that the angels can appear in a physical form that engages with the world very physically. But like, what is that tangibility? Like, what is that going on there? There's just so much we just don't really know. But let's go with the conditional side. It's like, okay, let's grant all that, but but God would still be the sustainer, the one who's provided and started that life. He's the one who also can end it. All life is conditioned on Him. And then you with the if you go with like the Gregory Nyssa and origin view, where for the universal, they would kind of go like, well, life doesn't cease to be, and therefore to have true life is to be in God's presence. You're going to be brought back over into that presence.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is that the Bible makes it very clear that God is, in 1 Timothy, I think it is, God is the only one who truly has immortality.
Yes. First
But
Timothy 1.
it also says that he can grant us immortality, which means that our mortality or immortality, and this will be true of the angels if we take a spiritual view of Psalm 82, is that all creatures are conditioned, or their mortality or immortality is contingent on his say-so.
Right.
So the question then becomes, which is the question that you get to with death and hell, is like, is God allowing them to remain forever, or is he ceasing them to be at some point?
Yeah.
Or is he bringing them, and if he's allowing them to be, is he allowing them to be in that place forever, or is he going to be bringing them back over here at some point? Or is he going to say,
Yeah,
no, your life's done?
Yeah.
This is unfortunately one of those topics. It's kind of like in our Discord. With the topic came up, and it turned into another topic, and a person's like, there's just a lot here. It's like, the problem with this topic is you have a lot of subtopics that feed into it. Like hell, we talk about as the final place, which means that it's the final, which means there's things that come before it that play into it, such as what does it mean to be human? What does it mean? What does it mean to have a spirit? What is it? What even is a spirit within the biblical mind? What is death? It would seem to be, and for most cases, death ties into this, the actual dying of the body itself.
Yeah.
Like we have like final judgment stuff in a lot of the prophets. They're talking about seeing corpses everywhere being consumed by these worms.
Yeah. Well, but there's also obviously that spiritual aspect.
And there's that spiritual aspect.
Because I mean, when Adam and Eve first eat the fruit, God tells them you will surely die, right? And so the whole lie of the serpent is you're not going to die, right? You're not. He just doesn't want you to be like him. And God's like, no, no, no. Now you're going to die. Like, and there's not like an actual like literal physical death that happens there.
I would argue the Hebrew goes different direction with that, though,
Okay.
as several do. There's been a few scholars, and people still disagree with this. But Robert
I
Alter,
look a full like foot shorter than you on the camera. Yes.
Robert Alter and John Walton, for instance, have pointed out that when you look at the construction of the Hebrew there, you look at it elsewhere, it can be referred to as "you will be doomed to die." And you can find this place like in Jeremiah, like the same construction of stuff. And so they would say that the NIV is closer, but it'd be better to translate as "you'll be doomed to die." And that the idea is that what is going to happen to you is that you are now going to be outside the garden, which you no longer have the tree of eternal life. Like that's why it says like I'm going to remove them so they don't live forever.
Gotcha.
And now they're out in the world of disorder, and there's going to be some kind of death. Now I don't say that with like hand and fist, like this is the only way I understand it, but like there does seem to be like it. The idea of spiritual death, why I do. There's a sense where I agree with this, sense I don't. It depends on how you're defining that for some people. But it doesn't seem like Genesis 1, like at least for the original reader, that's not how they're going to be understanding that. That's going to be like a later understanding.
So this is why we keep you around. No, but even so, right? The idea of spiritual. Let's go then Ephesians 2. Right?
Yeah,
you're dead in your transgressions. There is some sense, in whatever sense that Paul means that, of some layer of spiritual death.
If I may, just because we just recorded another episode, you can finish your point, but I just want to play another side and push back.
I'm going to hit you with my sock, otherwise, yes.
We just recorded our podcast on parables, and we talked about being dead to society. Like and so we one point even linked Ephesians 2 to that.
Right.
So there's a sense you can talk
dead to God then?
Well, you can even talk about I'm just saying that there's other ways you can talk about, like, is that strictly spiritual death? Like,
right.
And what do we mean by spiritual death? Because your spirit technically is still living, because and so you kind of get to like, what is spiritual death?
It's separated from God who is life. I'm out of frame. It's separated from God who is life.
Yeah.
Now I'm sliding again. Right. So to be separated from life is death.
So the question then is death just separation, or is there something else to death? Like, what does it mean to be dead?
I think to a degree, death is separation.
So then what?
If we're talking physical death, that is separation from the body. Right? If we're talking, in this case, spiritual death, that is separation from God,
who is life. So then, is it purely just separation, or is it still a...
That's kind of the question.
Because God is life, therefore we talk about how he cannot die. One, because he has a physical body to die, but two, if he did cease to be, he could not be eternal, he could not be God.
Right.
Humans were created, so we're not eternal. You can be made everlasting.
You can be made immortal.
Right. So then what does it mean then to like, do we go with Origen and Augustine? Like, let's say we remove the conditional perspective, take those two, just the soul or spirit, whatever word you want to use to kind of talk about what human beings are. Is he an eternal thing that, or not eternal, but an everlasting thing that cannot die because God has given it life? Or do you go with, well, no, life's contingent on God, so there's a sense where it can cease to be, and which I guess is another version of separation, because you're separated from existence.
Exactly.
in every aspect.
I don't know. I didn't think we were gonna come out with a conclusive answer here.
No.
But still, it's interesting that we wind up at the exact same place we started.
What is death?
What is death? Right? What exactly is that? So I guess perhaps we're still on that subject. Then we haven't really moved off into hell, because you can't answer the question of hell really without knowing what exactly is death.
And the hard thing too is, like, the only real experience that we have is we know of death of the body.
Yeah.
There's so much about the spiritual world that we just don't understand. Like, the LDS would argue for spiritual body, and they would regard that as still tangible, and or like, I mean, not as tangible, but material in some sense. I don't remember the exact language of it, and they base off on some of the Hebrew stuff where you see like they see an Elohim coming up out of the ground. It's like, okay, so but even then, like some Christians might agree with that definition, but also might talk about spiritual bodies in a different sense. Like, what does it mean that the spirits appear in a body, and like what kind of body do they have? Because Samuel was a human, then he's an Elohim, meaning that he's disembodied. He's not an embodied physical creature, but you can still see that. So what does it mean that he saw or she saw something as the medium? Or is that purely visionary? That's the point too. Was that visionary?
Right.
Because
yes.
he's the medium. The angels having certain powers that we don't have can appear in a physical form where they look like humans, but then they look like these other hybrid creatures over here.
Mm-hmm.
So then do they have a spirit body? And then what do we mean by spirit body? Or are they spirit and what do we mean by spirit? And then they appear in a physical form.
And then there's the issue of the angel of the Lord, right? He sits and he eats.
Yeah.
Right? So is there there's obviously some physical semblance to that.
The fact that he's eating.
Right, yeah.
Like you did your whole lecture on demonic possession and how they can bite and engage the physical world.
Yes.
But there's also a difference of like engaging the physical world and being like part of, like participating in it as if you were,
that is a little bit of the envy of Satan, right? I kind of talked about that as well, is that the idea sort of behind possession is not that they're just looking to cause chaos. They're also looking in some part to embody themselves like us.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a very Catholic thought, but again, just because it's Catholic doesn't make it wrong.
Saying that on a very ecumenical
yeah,
channel.
Exactly. That may change. No, I'm kidding. It's a very Catholic thought that the devil is envious of humans, that we are God's most valued creation because we are his image, and because we do have that we're his physical idol, his icon, if you will, to use the Greek word. Because of that, the devil is envious of that, and he wants that, and he doesn't have that, so his goal in possession is to, in some semblance, have that.
Yeah.
Which,
that's just one perspective.
It's one perspective on it. Yeah.
To go to another point that you were saying, spiritual death. I mean, just using it as a tie-in. When we're talking about the ontology of man, there has to be a sense where we have to understand it where it also applies to the incarnation, because we have to understand what is the condition of man, what is the ontology of man, what is the punishment of man, so that we can understand what is the Christ did. And guess what? The problem with theology is like everything's tied together. You kind of can't, and we have to understand. The hard thing is we have to understand like, how does that fit? Because there's directions we could go that would not apply to Christ, which would not apply to Christ, and therefore it's like, okay, well that's a problem. Or it would lead to Christ, but then would lead to heresy. Like, for instance, let's use spiritual death in one aspect of like ceasing to be. Well, Christ's spirit didn't cease to be. So is that what we mean by spiritual death? That's where like the Orthodox kind of come in and say spiritual death, that they're opposed to that idea. Or is spiritual death, like you said, the separation? Okay, so in what sense do we say that Christ, when he died on the cross for us, is he separated? Or are we saying that the punishment is death of the body, and therefore when he went on the cross, what he did was die, and then he goes to the underworld and proclaims victory to the fallen ones, and then the gospel, whatever that means, to the other spirits, and then and the ones who let's go like a very optimistic route. Let's say there's ones that he preached the gospel to and they believe, and then they're promised a resurrection of sort.
Yeah.
Into that. What is it?
Well, there will be a resurrection.
Well, like resurrection in that being part of the kingdom, the new kingdom.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like, in what sense do we mean when we say, again, death, and how does that apply to Christ? Because if we, depending on the version of, I'm going so many directions now, I'm sorry. When we talk about the punishment of man, because we're talking about hell is the final punishment. Hell, in one sense, we talk about it, whichever the three views you want to go with, is a final punishment. So the question is Christ dying? I want to phrase this. Let me back up instead.
Okay.
The atonement itself. We have to understand what Christ died for. why he died and what kind of punishment did he take on, because there are layers. And then a friend of ours in our Discord asked us, why do people not accept PSA? And I respond, because there's some variations of PSA that lead you to heresy.
Yes.
In their phrasing, and that's why some people reject it. So like, if you frame it as Jesus was damned by the Father, no, we can't say that.
Clappy heresy.
But then there's also the fact, if you consider perichoresis, then there's a sense when the Father is also damned and the Spirit's also damned, in some sense.
Actually, no, I would disagree there.
Depending on how you frame that.
But that wouldn't be perichoretic. Actually, that would not be. That would be patripassianism. It would not be perichoretic.
I guess it depending on who you're talking about.
All right, but the issue there, perichoresis, is it suggests that all three are active in an action. Okay, sure, but there's the difference between being active in it and being a part of it. For example, me right now, I'm speaking to you. You are an active part of this conversation.
Yeah.
But when I speak to you, you're listening. That's a passive. You're receiving. That is still an action. It's just not it wouldn't be to suggest that perichoresis would equate then the Father and the Spirit being damned in any sense would be like when I speak, you speak at the same, like you are speaking. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be the Son taking the damnation of the world upon himself, and then the Father and Spirit are receiving that, right? The Father receiving the pouring out of his wrath, I guess, or maybe it's the Father pouring out his wrath upon the Son. Is that part of the action? Not damning the Son. That's different. Those are different things, right? Because damning the Son would imply that, if God pronounces damnation upon you, you are separated from him. The Spirit, or the Trinity rather, is indivisible. So we can't have that. But the pouring out of wrath is simply the exhibiting the wages of sin upon someone, which is death. And it does entail that separation, but in this case, it was Christ separating from the body. Right? It was Christ taking on the spiritual in a very real physical way, kind of mirroring the incarnation. And in the most painful death possible to indicate the pain of his spirit.
Which is where some of the universalists come in saying that he's taken the wrath of God. And that's why they're saying, like, that's one of the arguments you can use to kind of build up there.
Therefore, we'll talk about that next time. But
but it's like the point being,
and then the Spirit, I would say overall, is just receiving. That. So,
but the point being is that when you get into the question of hell, because all theology ties together, thankfully and also not thankfully at times. But when we talk about final punishment, there's a sense of which we have to understand how did Christ take us from that. So for instance, like the Apostles' Creed, some translate it as hell because hell, some scholars have pointed out that hell's usage is different than the way it's used now in Old English. Hell used to refer just to the underworld more in English, and that's become more of like the eternal place, like that we kind of think of like a fire. And so, but the Greek refers to he's going down below. So he's gone to the underworld, as like Ephesians talks about. And so whatever he's taken on and whatever punishment that he has taken or that he's died in place of, or whatever framework we're going to run with, because he's truly human, we have to consider factoring him into like what kind of thing he saved us from, what kind of thing that he went through in our place, and all those kinds of things. And that's where it gets really tricky when you're trying to parse out each of these, because again, when you get into like the different views, the three major views, you have the different subcategories underneath. And some of them can lead you to that place of like, okay, so we're saying the Son was damned. Or like, oh, so you're saying the Son's spirit ceased to be. If we're saying that's what it means to be living, if we define living as being spirit, or if we're defining living as being embodied. And there's all these different other like categories you can run into of like, what does it mean? Because if he died for our sins, then that means that he's taken on something. That means that what he has done, we have to factor into those conversations. and especially when
yeah.
we're regarding the doctrine of man.
Mm.
We didn't really
Okay.
get very far.
No, we didn't, but that's okay, right? That's kind of the whole point, is just be working through these things, right? Figuring it out. This is what real theological conversation looks like. It's messy, it's chaotic,
Yep.
it's distracted in some instances, but it's still, as Josh said, all ties together. And so really the goal of this series is to A, show you guys a little bit behind the scenes of the conversation that Josh and I have, and B, to show you that it's okay for your theology not to be
Figured out
clean,
yet?
tidy, clean, tidy, neat, and all figured out and put in its proper order. You're going to be thinking through these things. We are thinking through these things. There's no simple solution of just believe this and you're good.
No, that's why I started saying this is one where I'm sure there's something I'm missing that will put you in this is the one that makes the most sense.
Just provided that one of those three camps has the right answer.
Correct. Right. But it's just like, there's a point where you start to get into a lot of speculation.
Yeah.
And there's times where, like, even our Discord, and I try to reference it, and you as well, we try to reference scriptural points.
Yes.
If that's not factored in at any point, you can talk philosophy all you want, but if it then contradicts scripture, or it goes against what it defines as what it means to be human, and which we're still trying to wrap our heads around, and what it means for death, then it doesn't matter what your philosophy is, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's not factoring in what it's trying to communicate. And we use like the Hebrew, for instance, with nephesh and what it refers to soul. Greek, depending on the period of time and the campus being used, like suke, also kind of runs in the same issue as nephesh, where it can refer to as like the philosophized way we talk about it, but also you find New Testament authors sometimes using it in the way of like, it's just referring to your life itself, the fact that you are living, but that you're suke because you're alive, like we are, right? Like you and I are right now. And it's like, okay, so what do you do with these things, and what does that really even mean? And that's like why Greek philosophy is so humble. Like, what is the soul? What does it mean to be? And even then, there's kind of like, okay, are we talking about soul or are we talking about life? And it's like, okay, so are we equating the two? Are we separating the two? Is life defined differently than the soul, or are they like, you can't have?
Well, and you never really see him use zoe, right? So that's Greek for soul, or for life. Excuse me. So.
Yeah. And it's just. It's like, why? And this is where I put my hands up. I was like, we'll have these conversations, but I'm also like, there's a point where I just cannot fully wrap my head around this. Maybe someone can better than I, but.
Probably. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
I don't know if you want to keep going, but I will say that the positive thing is, regardless of the three positions, regardless of if we try to figure out death, there's one who does know.
Right.
And there's one who is, thankfully, the actual judge over how all those things work.
Yes.
And we're just trying to understand what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever he does is just. If he chooses to do ECT, he's just to do so.
Yeah.
I
don't care
if you want to say it sounds. Some people try to argue statistics, like if that's what he does, you have to wrap your head around that. If it's annihilation, it's just. If it's universal cleansing fire, it's just. It's what he's the just one. We're just trying to understand what he's doing and try not to smear his character while doing it.
I will be talking a little bit about hell when I do my theodicy.
All right, cool.
So, not going into the different views.
No, don't worry.
Just the overall idea of why that's
I
just and right.
I think there's a good point to end here, actually. If based on the fact it looks like you're trying to conclude a little bit. Beyond the judgment too, all three camps seem to agree that hell exists. All three camps seem to agree that hell is an actual place and a thing that's done. Question is, what really happens in there?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to figure out. But we know that God is just.
You're probably not going to know this side of heaven.
No. Hence why there's been 3 major views throughout all of history.
Right.